Hey everybody, TacticAngel back on the PlayStation 5 for another ship review in World of Warships Legends. Today we'll be talking about HMS Cossack 1938. For this review, we'll start with some analysis, talk about commanders, look over the stats, and then get into some gameplay. If you'd like a rundown of the Cossack's history, I have left a link in the description to the other Cossack review I've made, the one with the nondescript year, also known as the 1940 version. And as for Cossack 38, this is the Cossack that we needed, but not the one that we deserved. Whatever that means, or it might be the Cossack that we wanted, but not the one we originally got, and even then, it's not necessarily even that. This is the version of the ship with her 4 dual 120mm turrets, and while that does have its advantages, the ship does come with a few downsides too. First, the good news though, the Cossack 38 has a ton of guns, and not a bad reload. This propels the Cossack pretty quickly into the upper echelons of potential gunboats at Tier 6, and being next to the most concealed gunboat at the tier behind only the Z-35 and Ale Yukikaze. It's a minor advantage, but it certainly gives you a bit more potential to get the drop on somebody, or to avoid a fight that you don't want. For fights that you do want, you come with a pretty good fire chance. Combined with 8 guns and that decent reload, there's no other Tier 6 destroyer right now that can start as many fires, other than the pay to not be very good Ship Smasher. In terms of raw HE DPM though, you're second to none. The unfortunate thing is, in order to really get all that fire and damage potential out there, you really do need to go really broadside. And that makes the overall DPM a little difficult to use on another destroyer. Same goes for the torpedoes. The downside there is really that this destroyer is kind of gigantic, and you tend to take a lot of damage in return if the target you're shooting at is equally motivated to shoot back at you, as opposed to perhaps someone else. And the last thing, this destroyer is from 1938. This ship has terrible AA. Like, pretty much the worst at Tier 6, which is saying something considering the number of Japanese destroyers there are at this tier. Some people will also be a bit disappointed in Cossack because she only has 1 rack of 4 torpedoes, with even less damage and range than the other Cossack. That's a trade-off for all those guns, but it's a trade-off that more torpedo-oriented players will hate, even more than the already underwhelming torpedo performance of the existing Cossack. In any case, the 38 is good at harassing battleships with her guns and pretty capable of taking on other destroyers. Though you can manage 3 guns over your shoulder kiting away, folks who will find this ship annoying are hyper-aggressive players who want to get all of their guns on target, people who are interested in torpedo boats more than knife fights, and obviously the people who are just not into destroyers. Overall though, Cossack 38 is a pretty solid platform in a game that doesn't involve a flat top. As we're looking at commanders, there's not much in this game that really fits this ship. Your best option is most likely going to be Philip Vine. His major strengths here are the ability to keep the ship moving and steering with the first slot quick fix, while also improving the fire chance with Rather Be Torching. Everything in between is pretty much whatever you want, with perceptive and excellent concealment being an option, as well as multiple speed abilities and improved DPM with stand or fall. Reginald Turret matches some of these options, but as a torpedo boat commander, you're investing a lot in 1 rack of torpedoes that aren't particularly good. The best thing about this is probably his access to Smogathon, bringing the total number of charges that you have to 4. That's a risky option since you won't be able to keep your engine or rudder in check once you get shot at, but it is an option. And other than the aforementioned perceptive or stand or fall, he has a pretty underwhelming set of abilities. If you're stuck with Jellicoe, his best characteristics are probably the ability to improve the fire chance with Burn It Down in slot 1. If you're bothered by the kind of lazy turret rotation on this ship, he's the only one who can really improve that in the stock British lineup, but everything else here is no frills for sure, and your base trait is totally wasted on a destroyer without a heel. As we look at the stats of the 38, I'll talk about her versus the field, but we'll also talk about where she's different from Cossack 1940, just for comparison purposes, whether you have that ship or looking to buy one or the other. First with survivability, Cossack has a pretty average amount of hit points, 48,800, and an unremarkable armor scheme. This says 6 to 20 millimeters here, but if we look at the armor model, we can further see nothing special going on. What is probably notable here, and not really a stat, is that this ship is very big. Here she is next to a Jervis, and I would probably say this is the chief disadvantage to her survivability, particularly when you're trying to get all of your guns on target. For artillery, you have 4 turrets with 2 120mm guns each. These range out to a fairly low 10.1 kilometers, which is 500 meters less than average, and exactly 500 meters less than the other Cossack. Reload is 5 seconds, which is pretty good considering the amount of artillery you have, and with an 18-second turret rotation, that is right in the middle of the pack, though it may feel a bit slow versus some of those other dangerous gunboats that you see at the tier. Nice thing is this 8% fire chance on the HE, even though your shells do a relatively pedestrian 1700 damage, this gives you the highest fire chance behind the ship smasher with its pathetic 8.1 kilometer range. With the HE DPM, you're top of the pack, tied with Oland. You could switch over to AP, but the chances this will actually be better are few and far between. In this case, you'd be third highest on the DPM in that department, which is basically top of the heap as well. The only really unfortunate thing about Cossack's artillery is the gun angles, which are pretty much just the front 2 guns forward with a slightly better profile shooting while retreating. And in order to get all of your guns in the fight, you'll probably want to make sure that whoever you're shooting at doesn't prioritize you as a target to shoot back. If the guns on Cossack are quite good, then it's no surprise that the torpedoes are terrible. The one thing you can say in their favor is that at least she has some, but they are the worst at the tier in terms of damage over time, since you only get 1 quadruple launcher, and this 15,433 damage isn't a lot. It is in fact about 1,300 less than the other Cossack. With 8 kilometer range, you're also somewhat limited in terms of range. 600 less than average and 2 kilometers less than the original Cossack. I would recommend saving these for a rainy day or for a thoroughly distracted opponent though, because 96 seconds is kind of a long reload, and you have so few of them, it's good to have something in your pocket to keep the battleships from trying to run down your smokescreen. AA is also pretty tragic. You have a total of 17 damage per second, which is surprisingly not the worst at the tier, but between the low DPM and even lower range, this 9 rating that she comes with stock is actually the worst rating for any tier 6 destroyer, for whatever that's worth. Similar to ships like Somers, you are going to end up being a priority target for carriers who know what they're doing. And in the case that you drive underneath a spotter aircraft, it's going to take years for your boys to shoot that down, and it'll probably just have to go away on its own. Coming next to maneuverability, you're a little on the slow side at 36 knots, but you actually turn pretty well for a big girl, particularly due to that lower speed. Your rudder shift is a completely average 3.6 seconds, and overall Cossack 38 feels very average in overall getting around potential and maneuverable enough for a knife fight. Finally, as we come to concealment, you are pretty stealthy for a gunboat, coming in 100 meters below average and 200 meters below average for just gunboats. This is going to give you advantages over basically anything that isn't a Japanese destroyer in terms of overall sea detectability. This is also going to give you a marginal advantage versus other gunboats, though probably not enough to shadow them for long periods of time. When we come to consumables, the Cossack is really very average, which makes her a bit different on the Royal Navy side of things. You have 2 smoke screens and 2 speed boosts. These are your totally normal fare, but the thing worth mentioning here is that you have a normal smoke duration, a normal number of uses of smoke, and a speed boost, notably without sonar, which is the key advantage of the 1940 Cossack over this 1938 version, and probably rather surprising to fans of Royal Navy destroyers. Now we'll get to the gameplay, and as we jump into this pretty quickly, I'll go ahead, throw my commander up on the screen. Of course, we're using Philip Vine for reasons other than just that it is historically awesome to do so. We have pretty average sort of destroyer gunboat skills chosen here. The two key ones here are obviously the quick fix in slot 1 and also rather be torching in our legendary slot. And everything else here is going to allow me to run around the battlefield more or less undetected. I guess we'll see. In any case, here we go. We're rolling out to the left-hand side of the map. Some might call it the west, some might call it the left, who knows. So overall, we've got this Cossack. It has the same camo as the other Cossack that we have in the game, which isn't all that surprising, but if you're looking for something different, this is not. And though not exactly swift in and of its own right, you can see we've made it up to 37 knots. That's a respectable speed for a destroyer at this tier, so it's not exactly as though it's bad. And I'm just kind of looking around. I'm at least interested in my options to torpedo that corner. Usually people sail around through that little gap in the two islands there, and though I don't think that I'm probably going to hit a lot of things, I am open to the possibility of trying. And obviously we have a Perth here right in front of us that has the crawling smoke. It's an interesting ship. I've played exactly one game in it, and all I can say is that he does not want to get shot. I know that much, because not much in the way of armor. So we're swinging out here wide, mostly to try to pick up if that German battlecruiser is going to actually come around that corner. The farther we get over here, the less it seems like that's probably going to be the case. And I'm not going to sail all the way out, you know, kind of into the far off reaches of the map just to try to, you know, get a spot on him. So I'm going to go ahead, come back in. We catch the last few seconds of actually capping the base. We get a little bit of an assist there. That's not specifically why we're doing it, but it works out. Now we're kind of doing a little bit of mental math here, because it looks like the Heinrich is going to spot this guy pretty quickly, and it looks like the Perth's rolling smoke just ran out. I'm gonna do something here a little bold here. I'm gonna call this aggressively helping someone, which is, hey bro, you need to slow down. I'm going to try to make sure that that Perth ends up in my smoke screen. So I slam on the brakes in front of him. Risk getting reported as, you know, griefing or whatever. So this guy can continue to go ahead, put his AP out there. There's a couple of good reasons to do this. One of which is Perth has a pretty respectable amount of DPM. It's going to force the Heinrich to consider whether or not he wants to actually do something about that ship, or if he just wants to, you know, sail off and do something else. This is going to help me a little, because I don't actually want to have all that much to do with this side of the map. You see, we very quickly check our ranges there. We're running at a very respectable 5.2 kilometers detectability from sea, and while that Heinrich is considering running down the Perth, we're going to put those torpedoes out there, because this is one of those situations where we know exactly what the Heinrich wants. Unfortunately, our saving of the Perth didn't last all that long, but it did last long enough that his death actually meant something. rather than him just taking whatever the next shell that he was going to take anyway. We're already moved on to try to capture B. Obviously, this is pretty standard destroyer work, moving from cap to cap. We are fast enough to do that, even though I say, and I'm not wrong in saying this, that this ship is a little slow in terms of overall destroyers. It is certainly fast enough to do most of this normal work. We wait our few seconds to actually cap B, and then we're going to go ahead, open up on the Tennessee, and you can kind of see this is kind of good territory for the Cossack to be in, because we're able to play long-range harasser where, you know, he shoots back at us. We get a lot of misses there because even though we're, you know, a pretty decently sized destroyer, he's not exactly hitting anything at this range, and, you know, we're not being punished for our mistakes here, or our choices. It's not really a mistake. This is a pretty decent idea. Now we've got just the rear guns. They're coming in. It looks like, again, we dodge. We got our second fire. That's a perma-fire. We're going to go ahead and leave it, because if he's got the baked potato skill, we don't want him getting out of that easy. And he can just go sail off and do whatever the heck he wants. We're going to go ahead and continue to try to make a difference in the game. We've got this Fuso here, and we're just watching him. It looks like his guns are turned entirely the other direction, so we start opening fire. This is not exactly what you want to do, because he's going to obviously notice that I'm here based on, you know, all of these shells that are hitting him. And you can see he's starting to react to the possibility that somebody might have also shot torpedoes at him. Not ideal, but again, this is for demonstration purposes. Not a terrible thing to show in a review, because obviously you can see how the nature of the guns is going to coax you into shooting a target like this Fuso, while also kind of neutering the effect that your torpedoes are going to have on a target. Now I do go ahead and hit the engine boost, thinking I'm going to boost back over to A to deal with the two targets there. And as I'm thinking about that, I'm kind of far away. We've also got C, and you can see on the far east side of the map, we do have an extra destroyer out there. So I decide, second thought, we'll go ahead, get back in there, try to keep C. Somebody else can worry about A. We're in a pretty decent spot as a team with still 3 caps to 1, even though, you know, at this point we're even on ships. I'm just going to make sure that we don't give up this cap over here, while there is certainly a threat still at A. Now we've hit 40 knots, finally, just barely. And, you know, this ship is fast enough. It's fast enough in spite of its several questionable traits. And we decide to go ahead, throw some HE out there, and, you know, kind of finish off our battleship problem there. We're obviously spotted because the destroyer is headed back towards C. And we turn in. Now we're turning out. This is one of those situations where, you know, this isn't great. This is kind of when you would want to have sonar. If I was in the other Cossack, I would have different options here. At this point, I just need to run. Get outside of his sonar range. And you can see we've got the maneuverability to do this. And that Z-35 is one of those ships, one of the few ships, that actually is quite a bit more concealed than I am. And also a pretty solid gunboat. In spite of our choices, we're going to struggle here a little bit because he is probably a better gunboat in many ways. We shoot some AP at him just to see what happens. It's not terrible. He's too angled at this point, so we're back to HE. We're just trying to finish him off, and you can see right now I'm just struggling with how awkward these gun angles are. He gets a few more shots into me, and the game has more or less resolved itself. And I end up on 421 hit points, which is 2/3 of fine. Now, as we jump into the end of the game, looking at how we did and how everybody else did, I will say that I realize at this point that I'm kind of a bit player in terms of the overall outcome of this match. Excellent game there by the New Mexico, so good on him. But closing thoughts in terms of the Cossack. I think this ship is totally fine. It doesn't feel incredibly over or underpowered, and it is more or less exactly what you'd expect of this ship if it had been in the game as its 1938 configuration from the get-go and at tier 6. When looking at the ship versus the other Cossack, I think the other one is possibly still the better ship. It has received a couple of buffs since that came out, and all around, that's just because it's less of a min-max ship. In games with a carrier, this thing is especially miserable to play, particularly when the enemy carrier is motivated to kill you for several reasons, like you're a CC. It's not that much worse in the AA department than the 1940 Cossack, but that one can at least shoot down the odd aircraft now and again. And probably the most disappointing thing about this thing is that it wasn't brought in at tier 7 with a bit more utility, a bit more capability. Overall, you have to really love this ship to want to get a second copy of it, and if you want to get your first Cossack, they're both in the hunt in terms of equally decent and equally awkward ships to play, thanks mostly to those gun angles and limited number of torpedoes. You saw me struggling there at the end to keep my several guns on target. In any case, those are my thoughts on Cossack. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching.